Hello, welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Thursday, January 30th. Hopefully, everybody's having a good day so far today. This is episode 481 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you, as always, for joining me. Today, we have a lot of news to discuss as Aaron Glenn continues to fill out his coaching staff for the 2025 season and beyond. And we've got 3 known hires to this point, with more coming and more reports as well as to other potential coaching options that Aaron Glenn could bring in here that we'll discuss a little bit later on. So we'll break all that down in today's episode. For those of you tuning in on YouTube, make sure to please like and subscribe. As always, thank you to those tuning in on all the different audio podcast platforms as well. The Jets continue the offseason here. Aaron Glenn, about 1 week now into the job, starts to round out his coaching staff here, and a couple names already that I think you've got to be really excited about if you're a New York Jets fan. So as always, before we begin, let's get you to our podcast partners, starting with our friends over at BetUS. The big game, just a little over 1 week away. The Super Bowl will take place. It's the Chiefs, it's the Eagles. If you want to get in on any of the Super Bowl 59 betting action, check out BetUS. Use my link in the description of this video to get a 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. Also, our friends over at SeatGeek, if you're looking for tickets for any sporting event or any in the best of entertainment, plays, concerts, shows, you name it, SeatGeek has it. And if it's your first time using SeatGeek, use promo code BUBSONSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase and get yourself out to some awesome events. Also, our friends over at Huga House, if you want to get any of their awesome selection of hats or brand new arrival sweatshirts, check them out and use promo code BUBS for 15% off any purchase. And when you use that promo code on your first purchase, your second purchase, you get a chance to get a hat for 30% off. So check them out and get yourself some awesome Huga House swag. So here we go, episode 481 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast, and we've got some coaching staff updates for Aaron Glenn and the New York Jets and this new regime. 3 hires yesterday: Steve Wilks for the defensive coordinator, Steve Hayden for the new offensive line coach, and Chris Banjo will become the new special teams coach here under Aaron Glenn. We still await the offensive coordinator, although it feels like we've kind of narrowed the list down to just a couple of names. And then, of course, really kind of get into a variety of other positional coaches on offense and defense here as the days continue to go on. But we got to start here with Steve Wilks. We'll just go right down the list of the hires that have been made already, and then some other reports that have come out about the rest of this staff, with an offensive coordinator potentially feels like here being named maybe today, maybe tomorrow, sometime this weekend. It definitely feels like the offensive coordinator is right around the corner. But I think if you're a Jet fan, you've got to be really excited about the Steve Wilks hire. To me, this is a very good start, was a very strong hire for Aaron Glenn. You know, where there's smoke, there's fire. For a while now, it's been reported, Connor Hughes, one of the first to report it, that it felt like the minute Aaron Glenn took over this job, he was going to look for a guy like Steve Wilks. And Steve Wilks has now been linked to the Jets really for a long time. Even prior to Glenn officially getting the job, you heard that Wilks would have been a potential option, or at least a rumored option, to join Aaron Glenn if he would have took this job here in New York. And that's the case. And we talk about Glenn and what he needs in this staff and its experience. That's one of the biggest things. And that's what you get here in Steve Wilks. You get a guy that's been a head coach before. He's been an interim head coach before. And it's not only just that, but he's been a defensive coordinator before. And he's been around the league. He's been around for a very long time now. He's been a defensive coordinator in many different roles at the college level. He's been a defensive coordinator in the NFL, right? Obviously a head coach as well. So there's a ton of experience and a ton of knowledge that I think can really bode well for Glenn as sort of a mentor for him and a guy that can help him through this process as he goes forward here as a head coach, and also a guy that Glenn can trust, and also a good defensive coordinator, because Aaron Glenn's not going to be calling plays, so it's going to be up to Steve Wilks. He's a good defensive coordinator. Not only does he provide experience and can help Glenn out from a coaching perspective, but he's also a guy that you can trust calling plays on defense and getting this group ready to play every single week, right? Most recently, he was out of the league last year in 2024, but the year prior was with San Francisco for one season in 2023 and had a very productive year. The defense under Wilks had a very productive season, right? They ranked 8th in total. Throw you some numbers here. 8th in total defense, allowing 303.9 yards per game, so top 10 there. They were the 3rd ranked rushing defense in football at 89.7, 14th ranked passing defense in football, allowing 214.2 yards per game, the 3rd ranked scoring defense in football. They also led the NFC in sacks with 48. They were also tied for 1st in the NFL with interceptions. They had 22, and their 88.6 PFF grade as a unit ranked 1st in the NFC. So in 2023, what Wilks was able to do with that San Francisco defense was very, very impressive. And I think you look at him coming into this defense right now where there's already a lot of pieces. Yeah, there's holes and there's definitely things that need to be fixed, but you've got 2 really good corners. You've got 2 really good edge rushers. You've got an all-pro in the interior in Quinnen Williams. You've got a guy in Quincy Williams, of course, an all-pro, and a guy that can go out there and dominate as a linebacker and really has proven himself. Obviously, coming over from Jacksonville, has gotten better each year, has proven himself now as one of the better linebackers in football. So while you do look at this defense, and there are some holes, right? You need some help next to Quinnen in the defensive line. They need to completely gut that position and start over. 100% agree. Linebacker, what's the future of Mosley look like? Jamian Sherwood, there's going to be some competition for him, especially with Saleh going to San Fran and Ulbrich going, and Ruttenberg, actually the linebackers coach for the Jets, last couple of years under Saleh, going to Atlanta. Definitely a possibility that Sherwood follows one of those guys to another team. But do you bring back Sherwood? If that's the case, I think you feel confident in a Quincy and Sherwood linebacker duo. You do need some help at safety, but there are a lot of pieces on this defense, and you feel like an experienced coach, not only a defensive coordinator, but also a defensive-minded coach here in Aaron Glenn, can get this unit back up to where they were the last 2 seasons going into this year, which was a top 5 unit, because that's what Wilks was able to do in San Fran. And there's obviously a lot of positives, too, to what Glenn was able to do in Detroit. And I just think, too, philosophy-wise, I think you're going to see some changes in the way the Jets do things defensively, which I actually think benefits the Jets. I mentioned the run stats, right? Steve Wilks had this 49ers defense in 2023. They ranked 3rd in rushing. They allowed 89.7 rush yards per game. The Jets over the last 3 years have been they have been a below average, at best, rush defense in football. I know last year towards the end of the season, they got a little bit better. And you look at the overall outlook from last year, rush defense-wise, statistically, it looks a lot better than it was. But this is a defense that has struggled to stop the run even when they were elite in 2022 and 2023. And Wilks is a guy that's proven to be able to stop the run with his scheme. And he's a guy that I think that fits perfectly too here with the Jets. He's had success stopping the run in the past. Jets haven't. Get this defense to be able to stop the run, because that's been one of their biggest weaknesses. I also think you've got to expect to see more man coverage with Steve Wilks. And just Glenn in general. I mean, you look at the Lions last year. They ran the 5th most man coverage in the NFL. The Jets ran man coverage 17th most in the NFL. So they ran man coverage about below average in terms of usage over a team like the Lions, who were one of the most heavily used man coverage teams. And that actually benefits a guy like Sauce Gardner, who in man one-on-one is one statistically, even despite a down year last year, since entering the league, has been statistically in many different categories the best man corner in football. So not only do you have man in coverage that they're going to play a lot more of, that benefits the Jets, because you've got corners, especially a guy like Sauce that's very good at man. You've also got two guys that know. Wilkes knows how to stop the run. You've also got Steve Wilkes, who 22 interceptions. The Jets don't get interceptions. They don't. Even Sauce. And I wrote an article on this, how Sauce can benefit from Aaron Glenn and a guy like Steve Wilkes. Because in previous spots, with the man coverage, that fits Sauce's ability, that fits his strengths. Previous stop, Steve Wilkes, high interception teams. The Jets need to be a team on defense that forces way more turnovers. They don't force enough turnovers. I think that's something Steve Wilkes can bring to the table. Also, another thing, too, I think you got to see this unit blitz a lot more. Glenn and even Wilkes, I think, are going to bring a much more blitz-heavy defense. Just looking at the Lions last year under Glenn, they blitzed 34.6% of the time, which was second in the NFL. The Jets blitzed a little bit more last year. You actually look at the blitz post-Salah. They blitzed a lot more post-Salah. I also think they blitzed a lot more because, unlike previous years, they couldn't get home with just 4, right? Douglas tore apart that defensive line so much, they couldn't get home with just 4 guys. So they were forced to blitz a little bit more. But they still ranked 13th in the NFL at 25.6% blitz rate last year. So still well below where the Lions were. And then you go to 2023, the Jets were the used blitz second least. They were only ahead of the Indianapolis Colts. The Jets only blitzed 16.3% of the time in 2023. And I think it could benefit this unit to blitz a little bit more. Man, blitz, forced turnovers. I think all things that you're going to see a lot more of here, hopefully under Wilkes as the DC. And, of course, Glenn just overall coming in as well, of course, having his footprint on it a little bit too. So there's Steve Wilkes. Good hire, love the hire, really good start, strong start, experience. Guy like Glenn needs that. The next hire here, Steve Heaton, new offensive line coach. Interesting background here. Never been an offensive line coach actually before. This is a guy that has been a tight ends coach. He was the assistant offensive line coach with the Cardinals in 2018. Kind of funny, under Steve Wilkes' staff that year. So does have that connection to Wilkes. But other than that, was with the Cardinals from 2013 to 2022. Primarily worked a little bit on special teams, but was mainly the tight ends coach. Worked in a tight end role from 2013 to 2017. Was the assistant special teams and assistant tight ends coach. 2018 was the assistant offensive lines coach. And in 2019 to 2022, became the Cardinals tight ends coach. And then over the last 2 years, became the Lions tight ends coach. So has that connection to Glenn. He also has a potential connection, already has a connection to potential offensive coordinator. Feels like the front runner now for the offensive coordinator in Tanner Engstrand, the Lions pass game coordinator. So over the last 2 seasons, so has that connection with him. So feels like this is similar to what Engstrand as well, if he does get hired. Glenn bringing over some of these Lions guys, kind of building, his staff similar to what obviously Campbell was able to build there in Detroit, which was a very successful staff. And, two of his coordinators have now gotten head coaching jobs, of course, in Glenn and Ben Johnson over in Chicago. But tight ends coach last 2 years with the Lions, mentioned it, spent 2013, 2022 with the Cardinals. And I'll say this, I think he walks into one Jets drive immediately and is better than Keith Carter the second he walks into the building. So I think this, look, how good or bad will he be? I don't know. None of us really know. This is really a first-time O-line coach opportunity here for him. Was an assistant for 1 year, but primarily has worked with tight ends, which, by the way, go hand in hand. And the Lions tight ends, when you look at some of the numbers, have been a very good blocking. They've been very good at blocking. The Lions tight ends, Sam Laporta, guys like that, have been very, very good at blocking. And I think, too, when you look at Steve Heaton and see who he was working under, right? He spent the last 2 seasons, Hank Fraley, who is the Lions offensive lines coach. You look at that Lions offensive line, which we'll read you some numbers here in a second. There's a lot of really good positives that hopefully he takes from him that he can bring here. But just where we were with Keith Carter, I'm in an absolute disastrous couple seasons with Keith Carter. Players calling him out, current players, his former players. It was a mess, a train wreck. And up until last year, the Jets could never figure the offensive line out under Salah and under Douglas and Keith Carter there as well. So it was a train wreck. The Jets haven't had competent offensive line coaching in a very long time. So hopefully Steve Heaton's the guy, but I could tell you this, he's already better than Keith Carter. How much better? We'll see. Hopefully a lot better. He should be a lot better because it's not hard to do. Keith Carter was that bad. But he's got a good opportunity here. You look at this Jets offensive line, there's a lot of pieces on this unit. 4 of the 5 starters from last year are 27 or under. John Simpson, AVT, Joe Tippmann, Olu Fashanu. You don't want to get ahead of yourself, but Olu and Tippmann give you some flashbacks, give you some show potential of DeBrickashaw and Mangold. How great would that be for the next 10 years? Those two are DeBrickashaw and Mangold for the next 2 years. Olu, next 10 years plus is Olu and Tippmann. AVT solid. John Simpson had a career year. You know, you'll probably draft a tackle, but I would be right tackle. I'd be so on board with bringing Morgan Moses back as well. How about you have all 5 guys that were starting last year up there in week 1 again? I'd be very open to that. Morgan Moses was solid last season. So the point I'm trying to make here is he's got a lot of talent, and there's a lot of importance on making sure that he's able to develop, right? Continue to develop Joe Tippmann. Continue to develop Olu Fashanu, especially Olu. You can find your left tackle of the future. That is massive for Muji, for Glenn, for this entire regime, if they can get one of the core pieces of a franchise locked in. If Olu continues to show growth and only get better under Steve Heaton. So he's got a big opportunity here to really take this offense line to another level after a very productive 2023 campaign or 2024 campaign. Something that the Lions have done very well the last couple years. They're a phenomenal run blocking team. 2024 last season, they were second ranked run blocking team in football with an 80.4 PFF run block grade. The Jets ranked 12th at 67.4. The Lions were 15th in pass block grade, second in run block grade. Like I mentioned, Jets 17th pass block grade, 12th in run block grade. I would say the Jets were probably a little bit better against pass block. I think overall the Jets were probably better than the numbers show up front on the offensive line. Although I would say that the offensive line for the Jets early in the season took a beating. You had that stretch of games. Denver was rough. The Minnesota game was rough where they blitzed the heck out of the Jets and they had no answers. Those games definitely hurt the numbers a lot, hurt the grade a lot. Jets didn't handle the blitz very, very well last year, which is definitely something I'm sure you could dive deeper into the analytics and see how Detroit did and stuff like that. But the Jets O-line is a positive. It's so annoying. There's a common note. There's a weird misconception that the Jets offensive line is not good or didn't have a good year. Like, it was a very productive season for that unit. It was very productive season last year. It was a very, if they do exactly what they did last year, I'd take that. Obviously, you'd like to see them get better. You'd like to see Olu continue to develop, and Tippmann, of course. And they're all a lot of, again, 4 of their 5 are under 27. So they're only getting better. Simpson's essentially in the prime of his career. But there's a common misconception. People are like, oh, the Jets offensive line, got to fix the O-line. No, you don't. The offensive line was very good last year. That's what we barely talked about it. That's when you know it's good. So new offensive line coach, Steve Heaton. Final coaching hire officially here is Chris Banjo will become the new special teams coach. Young, 34 years old. Just got out of playing. Finished up his career in 2022. He spent 2013 to 2022 with the Packers, Saints, Cardinals. Started on the Jags practice squad, then went right to the Packers. So was actually a teammate of Aaron Rodgers. And he's got a ton of connections to Glenn, Muji, and even Sean Payton. Was with the Saints. Glenn was his defensive backs coach when he was a player. Sean Payton, of course, was his head coach. After his final season with the Cardinals and in the NFL in 2022, he gets hired under Sean Payton in 2023 as the assistant special teams coach for the Broncos. So not only was he working under Payton when he played under him, also played under Glenn, but he also has the connection to Darren Muji, assistant GM, same time he was in Denver. So tons of connection here between Payton, Glenn, Muji, Broncos, Saints, Jets. Felt like this was going to happen for a while, and it does. And a guy that I think you also, look, never know with any of these guys, but I think you've got to be excited about. He's young, feels like a guy that can kind of come in, take what he learned in Denver and even as a player and really apply it here. And I think what's interesting about Banjo is he's coming from a very successful Broncos special teams. They've been very good over the last 2 years since he's been there on that staff. And I think that's a positive considering taking that and bringing it here. He also, another connection too, Mike Westhoff. That was his staff in Denver. He worked under him. Westhoff is going to help Glenn here. Feels like he's going to help Glenn kind of when he needs it. He can be, he can definitely be an ear for him. Won't come on this staff, but Westhoff's a guy that feels like Glenn can rely on. So you've also got that connection as well from Denver and Glenn and all that stuff and the Jets and that good stuff there. But yeah, Banjo is, learning under Westhoff, I think is key. Seeing the success they had, I think is key. He's also fresh out of the league. Which I think is, he played a role in special teams as a player, and I think that's beneficial, especially with these new rules. It feels like the Broncos this year had a pretty good handle on some of the adjustments on special teams. And you just look at the Jets. Like, I think the Jets needed, obviously they did, and then none of the 2024 Jets coaches will return, right? You thought maybe Tony Oden would return. He's gone. Marquand Manuel's gone. You thought, White Cotton as well might come back, Aaron, but he's gone. Aaron White, and I believe he goes to Dallas as their D-line coach, so he's gone. So it's a completely new staff, but especially Brant Boyer specifically. Yeah, the Jets need to fresh up everywhere, but especially special teams. I think Brant Boyer was starting to wear off a little bit. Very good 2023 special teams, but this past season, the special teams regressed so badly, and Boyer's been here since 2016. Survived bowls, survived gays. Saleh kept him on the staff, been here for almost a decade. It was time to move on. He now goes to San Fran. But you look at the numbers here, right? Just PFF grades. Broncos in 2023, Banjo joins the staff. They had an 83.9 special teams grade. That's 11th in the NFL. You go to 2024, they had an 87.5 PFF grade. That's 8th in the NFL. They were one of the better special team units in the NFL, top 10 over the last 2 seasons. You then look at the Jets. Last season, they were phenomenal. 89th in the NFL, or 89th PFF grade. That was 5th in the NFL. Fast forward a year later, and the aggression was awful. Down 14 points to a 75.7 grade, which was 22nd in the NFL. So bottom half of the league by far for this New York Jets team. You talk about the kicking was a disaster. You didn't get much production from kick returning perspective, punt returning perspective. Thomas Morstead remained the one constant. But other than that, it was a train wreck. So you needed a new voice. You get a young voice, and you get a voice that learned under one of the best in Mike Westhoff, has the connection with Glenn, and a guy that's coming from an organization that has had a ton of success on special teams the last 2 seasons. Here's an interesting nugget as well. The Broncos downed a league-high 5 punts last year on the 1-yard line. So there's an interesting nugget. The nerd in me is coming out there. So those are the 3 hires we know officially. Steve Wilks for DC, Steve Heaton for offensive line coach, and Chris Banjo for special teams coach. Banjo and Wilks felt like it was coming for a while. Heaton makes sense, so no real surprises. Now, I want to throw this here up as we kind of close things out and just give you some other updates here. So this was from Zach Rosenblatt earlier today. Aaron Glenn started filling out his Jets staff yesterday. Obviously, we mentioned Wilks, Banjo, Heaton, and would expect more today and through the weekend. Some names to keep an eye on as potential additions. Tanner Engstrand, offensive coordinator. David Blau, quarterbacks coach. Chris Harris, DBs coach. Blau is interviewing with both the Jets and the Bears. Harris interviewed for the Jets DC job and wasn't retained by Tennessee, so he's available. So those are the updates. I will say this, Tanner Engstrand seems like it's going to happen. Kind of mentioned it with Steve Wilks, right? Where there's smoke, there's fire. It feels like it's going to happen. In terms of the other 2 guys, David Blau and Chris Harris, I could definitely see it. Would Blau be interested in going to Chicago, though, over the Jets? That'll be interesting. I guess really kind of view on the whole quarterback situation and Ben Johnson and his role there and all that stuff. But it feels like Engstrand is going to be the guy, right? He didn't get the job in Detroit to be the Lions OC. He was going to go to Chicago, but Ben Johnson's going to call plays. So Engstrand wants to call plays. You already added Steve Heaton coming over from that Detroit staff. You've already got Aaron Glenn. It feels like it's going to be another Detroit guy. I think we'd all love Nick Caley, but I think personally, he's probably going to go to Tampa Bay, and it's going to probably be, I think it's reasonable to choose, makes sense to choose Baker Mayfield in a steady quarterback situation over possibly 1 year of Aaron Rodgers and then a rookie in 2026 and beyond, or some guy you draft this year that, could play next year, whatever the Jets do there. But it feels like it'll probably be Engstrand, right? Pass game coordinator last 2 seasons, connection with Glenn from Detroit, connection with Heaton from Detroit, wants to call plays, get that opportunity here. I would still like to see another veteran on this staff offensively. I like Wilks, but I think it's even maybe more important to have a former head coach or a veteran guy on this offensive staff, because that's not Glenn's expertise, right? Glenn can step in on defense and fix things if he needs to. He's not going to really have that ability because he's just not, ideally he could, but you'd like to have the offense side of the football wrapped up and pretty good to go, so he can just oversee everything and not have to try and, he's a defensive-minded coach. We saw with Saleh, right? Offensive staff was brutal. It killed Saleh. That can't happen. Jets offense has got to get out of the 1900s. They've got to get to the 21st century because they haven't in a while. So whether that's a Todd Haley, whether that's an Anthony Lynn, any of those guys I think I'd be happy with to add on the staff. We talk about it all the time, but McVay had Wade Phillips. I think that could be kind of the comparison. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. That'll wrap things up. What are your thoughts on the Jets coaching hires so far? Wilks, Heaton, Banjo, like them. Where do you stand on them? Let me know what you think. We'll have a lot more content coming your way. Any other news that comes out, we will be here discussing it all. And thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, as always, JETS, 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 Jets.